China is sending its vice president, Han Zhang, to President-elect Trump's inauguration on Monday. This is the first time a high-ranking Chinese official will attend an American inauguration. Trump originally invited Xi Jinping himself, but the Chinese president will not attend. One of his ambassadors writes this on X. We stand ready to work with the new U.S. government to enhance dialogue and communication, jointly pursue a stable, healthy, and sustainable China-U.S. relationship, and find the right way for the two countries to get along with each other. Trump says he's been in communication with Xi Jinping through representatives. Joining me now is Hudson Institute senior fellow, Atlas Organization founder, and the author of The Decisive Decade, Jonathan D.T. Ward, back with us. Jonathan, good to see you. What is your outlook for the U.S.-China relationship under Trump?
Good morning, Maria. Well, one, I think we're going to have a much tougher administration than we had in the Biden years. Obviously, there's a whole lot of important stuff to get done on trade, on cybersecurity, on China's military buildup in the Pacific, on fentanyl. We have a pretty broad spectrum set of things across the entire board that have to get done here. So having an envoy to the inauguration, I mean, this is sort of Xi Jinping's ceremonial representative. Apparently, he attended the inauguration of King Charles, for example. So he's sent by Xi to go and do ceremonial things. But at the end of the day, there's a broad swath of work that has to be done in this relationship to regain America's prime position in the world, to ensure that we're the top economy with the top military that's ready to push back entirely against Beijing's entire push for dominance. So I think that's what we're going to see the focus on in the next 4 years, is action across the board.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is vintage Trump. You just don't know where the man is going to go. You just do not know how he's thinking or what he's thinking. He's inviting China to the inauguration and then getting ready to slap tariffs on them later on that day. I mean, China has reportedly been stockpiling U.S. soybeans in anticipation of Trump's tariff threats, importing a record 105 million metric tons last year alone, Jonathan. China also reported a trade surplus of nearly $1 trillion for 2024. That's 3 times higher than what it was during 2018, Trump's initial tariffs on imports. China accounting for roughly 27% of worldwide industrial production, according to the Wall Street Journal. And incoming Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke about it during the Senate confirmation hearing yesterday. Watch this.
China is the most imbalanced, unbalanced economy in the history of the world. They are in a severe recession/depression. They are attempting to export their way out of that, as opposed to doing the much-needed internal rebalance. Yep. So, I am with you on the need to open markets, but we cannot allow a player like this to flood our markets or to flood the world.
Jonathan, I thought it was great. I mean, Bessent also noted that the U.S. may want to force China to make catch-up payments for failing to honor the commitments during Trump's first term. They basically said, Bessent basically said China is starting behind the 8 ball. And so what do you think plays out here?
Well, look, he's got that right. We can't allow them to flood world markets. We can't allow them to flood our market. And it's also a giant vulnerability for China. And don't forget, this is all deliberate. I mean, the way that they built that position in the international trading system is through the massive theft of American and allied intellectual property, through converting that into the dominance of specific strategic industries, and also converting that in turn into rising military power. So that entire machine has to be stopped in a sense. I mean, you can't have them flood the global markets. And at the same time, to have $1 trillion in a global trade surplus, most of that is with the U.S. and our allies. So we have an enormous amount of leverage over the trading relationship. And I think that's where we're going to see huge vulnerability. They're very concerned about the tariffs. I mean, that really scares them. And their ability to retaliate against that is somewhat limited, at least in terms of the trade relationship itself. I'd expect there'd be some retaliation against American companies. We've seen them do probes already, and I think they'll do that sort of thing. And American companies are going to have to get out of harm's way in that regard. I mean, they have to be prepared for this sort of situation. But fundamentally, the U.S. Has the upper hand, the potential to regain the upper hand, and we really have to focus on remaining the top economy in the world with no chance of Beijing achieving its long-term dream, going all the way back to Mao Zedong, of surpassing the USA. We can't let them do that, and I think Secretary Bessent understands that, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Now let's talk TikTok. The ban is looming. The deadline is this Sunday. If it's not sold to a U.S. buyer, it's banned. President Trump reportedly considering an executive order to delay the ban. As President Biden reportedly says he will not enforce the law come Sunday. Incoming National Security Advisor Michael Waltz said this: "We will put measures in place to keep TikTok from going dark, and promising Trump will protect Americans' data." Now, some Americans have been flocking to another Chinese app called Red Note. It is more heavily censored, actually, and it's used almost exclusively by Chinese speakers. So why Americans are going on Red Note is beyond me. Jonathan, your reaction?
Sure, and let's not forget what the bill in Congress is really about. It's about the prevention of foreign adversary-controlled applications. So, I don't think we're ultimately going to see a migration of users from from a ByteDance-controlled app to a direct Chinese CCP little red book is what it's called, Red Note. I don't think we're going to see that because this legislation is ultimately broader. You can't just go from one platform to the next. I think people are going to have to follow through on that. And in the first administration, they were very far along in terms of figuring out how to get TikTok into American hands, if I remember correctly. I mean, they had an Oracle bid. They had Microsoft involved. I mean, today you have Kevin O'Leary talking about it, I think, on your show as well. And, so I think there are going to be options here in order to retain the platform, but get ByteDance out of the equation, which has always been the important thing. I mean, we've heard all the arguments about that. I think everybody knows why that's important. And ultimately, you just have to get, Chinese ownership out of the equation on a major now media platform in the U.S. that reaches almost 50% of an entire younger generation. So I think that remains the problem at hand, and there are solutions, some of which were developed in the first Trump administration.
China is accusing the United States of dumping lower-end semiconductor chips into the market. I mean, this is rich, giving its own chip makers an unfair advantage through grants and incentives. The U.S. says Beijing bankrolls its domestic chip firms, a violation of global trade agreements. And the Biden administration rolled out tighter restrictions on semiconductor manufacturing and exports, adding more than 24 Chinese companies to a trade blacklist to slow down China's military and technology capabilities. Jonathan, what about this and the dumping of chips?
Well, look, I mean, we have to keep the focus up on technology. I mean, this is important. You do not want them to have the ability to compete with us on artificial intelligence and other high-end aspects of 21st century technology. I think that has to remain a priority. And at the same time, I mean, yes, it's complete nonsense to hear this from Beijing. I mean, the Chips and Science Act put about $45 billion into our sector, whereas I've heard estimates on Chinese subsidization of its chip makers up to $200 billion. So their entire economy runs on subsidies. I mean, Robert Lighthizer original Section 301 case made totally clear how their economy works. I mean, how intellectual property theft, subsidization, and sort of import substitution, all of that comes together to create the industrial behemoth that we've seen. And we cannot have them, commodifying legacy chips. That would create so much, so many problems across numerable sectors. We can't have that, and we can't have them, flooding our markets in this or any other goods. So again, we've got to continue to target the key sectors, make sure that they're not advancing. We have tons of tools to do that. And then we have to gain the upper hand on the trading relationship and make sure that they are not surpassing us on key technologies, which feed into their military capacity, which, by the way, they're preparing to use in the Pacific. So that's obviously the other big piece of what we're going to have to do in China's strategy.
All right. Great analysis, as always, from you, Jonathan. Thank you. We'll be watching all of this.